Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to these sessions on India. You will have noticed that the timing has slipped a bit, and I am scheduled to do 2 sessions on India. One, a sort of beginner's guide to India, followed by a slightly more advanced user's guide to India. But what I may do, with your permission, is to sort of run the 2 into one session, so that we will catch up the time that we've lost. Please, therefore, feel free to interrupt at any time if there's something that isn't clear, or if you want a little bit of specific advice on a particular point as we go through. By way of introduction, I'm one of the international trade advisors for the southeast of England, and I cover, alongside education and skills, I also cover India as an India champion's role. So I thought I'd start off with a little bit of a geography lesson, because it is important when you're first starting to get to know India. The sheer size and quantity and range. And the first part will definitely be putting India into a global context. The capital, or the current capital, the original capital used to be Calcutta, but the current one is New Delhi. It's got 12 million at least as a population, so it's quite a sizable market. It's also the centre of the first UKIBC business centre, which has some hot desks available. If you are thinking of doing business in India, you want a facility, you perhaps want some reception, some telephone calls taken, then UKIBC business centres would do that for you. The first opened in New Delhi at the end of last year. The next, I think, is Mumbai, and then Bangalore, and they will roll several of those out across the country. Mumbai is probably the business centre, the Bollywood centre. That's maybe where you will go unless you are dealing with the government. If you're dealing with the government, then obviously Delhi is the place to be. Otherwise, Mumbai. I think the interesting thing about Mumbai, and it's fairly typical of a lot of Indian cities, is the sheer difficulty of getting from one appointment to another. So you might think you've got 2 meetings, and you'll think, I'll do those in the morning and then do something else in the afternoon. Be warned, it can take you at least 2 hours to travel across Mumbai if your appointments are at different ends of the city. So you need good local advice on where you are having meetings and how you are going to get there. Kolkata is the so-called intellectual capital. That's their own name for it. But it's interesting that Pune, near Mumbai, is often described as the Oxford of India, because it has so many universities, research centres, colleges and so forth. And Bangalore is the opposite of Silicon Valley. I suppose you can have a Silicon Peak, can't you? But it doesn't quite sound as good. But certainly Bangalore is the IT capital. But more importantly, I think, is to get a grip of the fact that India is a collection of 28 states and 7 other territories. And the states are very autonomous in many ways, and rather than thinking of doing business with India, it is often a better idea to think of doing business with a particular state. They often have packages which will encourage business enterprises or educational enterprises to go into states, and it's a much more manageable target to try and achieve. You will recognize some of the names in that list. You'll probably recognize Goa, you'll recognize the Punjab, you will maybe recognize something like Chandigarh, but there are 28 states, and they are all in different stages of development. In a way, they are all mini little countries developing, and that's one of the attractions of India, that you've got 20 or 30 years of development as each of those states goes through its own development cycle. So there really is a lot of business that you can accomplish in certainly in your working lives. So there we are. Let's have a look at the facts and figures. The sheer size of it, 1.2 billion, isn't perhaps the most important feature on that slide. It's the ratios. It's the fact that the median age is only 25. Now, if you think, what does that mean? It means that probably the majority of Indians have still got their full working life ahead of them. So there is an enormous amount of development that will take place. Compare that with the UK, where the median age is 40, so typically they've only got half their working life ahead of them. And then look at the age profiles. 0 to 14, 29, 30, almost a third of the population is under 14, and 2/3 are under 65. And it's that driving force, if you like, that the fact that the working population is going to keep growing until 2020. The size of the working population will keep growing for another 10, 15 years, and then it will remain static. It won't shrink, it will continue at that level for another 15 years or so. So there is an enormous explosion in the consumer market, because if you think of working population, then that equates to the consuming population. If you're working, you're likely to consume. So it is that market which most of you will want to tap into. And I suppose one of the particular factors about India is that the education is very traditional. So most of the people who are now age 14, say, will be leaving school with a reasonable education, but they won't be job ready. And even if you look at the graduates, at age 22, 23, they will have good degrees in engineering, in maths or physics or statistics, but they will not be very good at working. And therefore there is a huge demand for vocational training. And I would think that if you're attending this show, then certainly education and training is probably one of your particular specialisms. So the potential there, if you can tap into it, is outstanding. And when you hear people talk about the Indian demographic windfall, it is this continuing regeneration of the working population. New people joining the workforce, new people wanting to acquire skills in order to make them more competitive for jobs. And size, think of India as a separate planet, if you would. It is in itself, it's got a bit of everything. So if you think of it not as a country, but think of it as a planet, you'll be much closer to what you're trying to achieve. And then think of the sizes. There you are, 4,000 kilometres top to bottom, 2,500 kilometres side by side. Again, look at the figures, but think what that means if you're trying to visit different companies in different parts of India. If you've got a meeting with a company in Delhi and then another one with a company in Bangalore, you've got a day's travelling in between by the time you've checked in, flown, checked out, and moved from the city, from the airport to the city. So you have to factor that sheer size into how you approach India. And the more you look at that, perhaps the more you think that it would be worth concentrating on one of the individual states rather than India as a whole. In terms of population, it's predominantly a Hindu population, but think of Hindu not so much as a religion, but perhaps as a way of life. For instance, there's nothing in Hinduism, as far as I'm aware, that says you have to be a vegetarian. But certainly the cow is sacred, and the majority of Hindus are vegetarian. Similarly, there's nothing that says they shouldn't drink alcohol, but the majority that you meet will not drink alcohol, nor, for that matter, will they drink strong coffee. because it's a stimulant. So you need to understand where your hosts are coming from if you go out for a meal with them, or if you invite them to a buffet or something of that nature. And again, look at that figure for Christians, 2.3%. 2.3% is quite a small percentage. So it's interesting to think that that means there are 30 million Christians in India. And if you look at the latest UK census, we've got 33 million. So there are practically as many Christians, although it's only 2.3% of the population in India, as there are in the UK. The advantage, I suppose, on the language side is that whilst there are 15 different languages, 15 different official languages and endless other languages, English enjoys a particular status as being an associate language, a formal associate language. And most of the business people you will be talking to will happily converse in English with you. But where, if you are talking to perhaps parents of school children or graduates, you may then find that the level of English falls off, and it may be that you need, whatever information you are carrying, you may need to translate that into one of the local languages, one of the most appropriate languages. Again, we think of India as perhaps being an industrial country. The common perception is it's an industrial country that produces lots of cheap goods, which is totally wrong. It's also an agricultural country. 2/3 of the workers, or 3/5 of the workforce, are currently engaged in agriculture. And the interesting fact about that is that the workforce in agriculture is shrinking as there is a move towards the urban centres. So people are leaving the land and going towards the urban centres for more traditional work. So not only is the demography of the country driving the labour force up, but the drift from land to urban centres is also providing additional workforce. So there really is this huge growth in the consumer sector. 24 million people, that's what, just under half the population of the UK, enters the workforce every year. So India has to create that number of jobs every year just to keep static. And they are doing. They are expanding at that rate. So again, 24 million people need training in some sort of vocational skill every year, as well as all the ones who want to retrain or change careers. The urban middle class numbers, 300 million. And I think the figures, and they have to be guesstimates, suggest that that grows by 30 million every year. So if you're targeting consumers in either products or in services or in vocational training, you have got a new population, half the size of the UK, every year to go at. So the potential in India is absolutely huge. Some of the idiosyncrasies, the time difference is 5.5 hours. Now, I don't think there are many other time zones which have half an hour, and it can be a bit confusing sometimes when you're looking at your watch and trying to see what time it is back home. Which way does the half an hour go? And the counting system is slightly different. There is a crore, which is 10 million, and there is a lakh, which is 100,000. So you will often hear, say, 65 crore mentioned as a price of something or a number of something. And it is common all the way down, even to the labels in shop windows. That is the counting system they use. You get used to it, but it can be confusing. If you're going to visit, then obviously you need to take money, and one of the first things you'll find that it's very difficult to get rupees in this country. But it is very easy to either get them at the airport or through ATMs. ATMs are all over the place, and your cards will work quite easily. So if you're planning a visit, you perhaps get a little bit at the airport just to cover immediate taxi costs, and then use an ATM where you'll get a better exchange rate. The electrical sockets, I don't suppose many of you remember, but we used to have quite big round pin plugs, 15 amp plugs they were. That's the traditional plug in use in India. And they also use a very small round pin, 3 round pin, for 5 amp circuits. But again, if you're staying at an international hotel, what you'll find is that the socket generally is a universal socket. It'll take practically any plug that you carry with you, whether it's English, American, European, Australian. The adapter socket in the wall is absolutely brilliant. So it's not a hard task to get yourself to India. If you are going, then certainly if you're going for business, you may well want to contact the UKTI, UK Trade and Investment in India. And we've got offices widely scattered in Chandigarh, in Calcutta, Hyderabad, Chennai, Bangalore, Pune, Mumbai, Ahmedabad, and the main High Commission in Delhi. Within each of those, there are lots of commercial officers who will be able to assist you, and they are arranged in teams. So there is an education team in India, there is an ICT team in India, and the way it's organized is that each of those offices will have someone who can cover that sector. But the lead person will perhaps be in the most appropriate city. So for ICT, for example, the lead person, I believe, is down in Bangalore, whereas for education, the lead person is in Delhi. But they are very easy to access. They've all got email addresses, and they do travel around. So any request for information that you might have in terms of what the market is like or arranging appointments, it can be done nationwide. Again, India in figures, and think not so much of the fact that there are 350 airports in India, but think of that in terms of the number of different people who need training. Think of all the skills that take place in an airport, from basic car parking through to security, through to check-in, through to ticketing, plus all the aircraft maintenance, plus the air traffic controllers, plus the coffee shops, the restaurants, the baggage handlers. All those are a training requirement. And if you're into any kind of training, then there will be people who can do that. Next one, 64,000 kilometres of railway. So again, don't think of railway as such, but think of all the ancillary things. Think of all the signalling that goes with that. Think of all the stations. And believe me, a lot of the stations are very similar to the ones you see on the Chiltern line. Same sort of green little ticket windows and whatnot. So there's all that. They all have those little kiosks. So there are things to sell. They all have advertising boards and so forth. So think not of the distance, but think of the opportunities there are for sales and marketing. Similarly, 3.3 million kilometres of roadway. Just think of how much Armco that is along the side of it, or street lighting, or street cleaners, or waste bins, or white lines, or signage. It's a huge market to go for. Probably the only figure that's going down is the number of landlines, because by and large, India has skipped a generation. They've skipped the hardwired telephones and gone straight to mobiles and to the internet. And mind-boggling figures again, 81 million users, and that is almost certainly out of date. It will be over 100 million now. But this is the slide that I find most interesting, because 19% of all babies worldwide are actually born in India. 1 in 5 babies born throughout the world are born in India, and I think another 1 in 5 are probably born in China. But 1 in 5 are born in India. And Indians are very careful of their children. They look after them. So anything that you have, any market that involves babies, such as buggies, clothes, toys, cots, toys for cots and so forth, will sell, will have a premium. There is even a device on the market that you can put babies' clothes through, and it will scan to make sure there are no little sharp bits of metal or anything left in it. And Indian parents will pay a premium for clothes that have been checked in that way. But the other aspect is the size. How do you get into the market? Now, you're all familiar with Del Monte, yeah? Anybody not familiar with Del Monte? No? Well, they reckon it took them about 7 years to get into the Indian market, to be in a position where they are reasonably well known. And what you can't perhaps see on that is that figure there. That's a 10-gram sachet. That's a tiny sachet. And that is how Del Monte got their name into India. Not through the packaging that they are used to in the West, but in the 10-gram sachets that were distributed at airlines, at airline restaurants, at fast food outlets, at cinemas, wherever you bought fries. The Del Monte tomato ketchup sachet was the freebie that went with it. And that was their route to market. That was their way of getting known. And size is also important, because if you go shopping for some washing powder tablets, how many do you buy? Box of 30? I mean, if you can get 2 for 1, you probably come away with 60 of them. The market in India is for 1 at a time. And that's 2 reasons. One is cost, obviously, and the other is storage. There often isn't sufficient space in a house or a kitchen to cope with large quantities of material that you're stocking up. So when you are entering the market, please think of your route to market, your size to market, explore just what it is the Indian is buying. And make sure that you are offering that. Don't offer what you sell to the UK, but look at how you can adapt that and offer it to the market as to how they want to buy it. So airlines, coffee shops, and so forth. It's still a country of extremes, and I think what you have to be careful of is being taken by one or the other. So yes, there is an advanced new metro system in Delhi, but equally you will see somebody cycling along delivering a block of ice. Now, both those are true, and there's the whole spectrum in between as to how India is performing. And you've got to analyze that, look at that, and see how you are going to modify your training, your product to suit their particular buying needs. And if it took Del Monte 7 years or so to get established, what we're saying is that 10 years is no particular time at all in that life cycle. So you have to act small but then think long term, think big, and think what those 1 in 5 babies who are born now will be doing in 10 years' time. Where will your product fit into their particular lifestyle? When will they want to buy? When will they want to consume? When will they want to be trained? And how can you position yourself now so you are ready for that child when that child is 7 or 10 or 16 or so on? And hopefully you will use UKTI along the line. So if you're here, you will be aware that we have lots of different services that we can offer in support of your entry to India. Passport to export, gateway to global growth, market visit support, research on the ground, commercial officers. All of them are good individual products that you ought to be considering and ought to be using. But they really become more powerful when you begin to put them together as a package. So there you are, you're going off to the airport, you've been in touch with the commercial officers, and there's about 40 of them sitting out there at the moment. They will have perhaps undertaken some research for you. They may have even put together a program of visits whereby you will meet potential buyers, people who have been told about your product or your service and have actually said, yeah, I'd like to meet that company. So you're meeting people who have already said, yes, we want to meet you, maybe linked up with an exhibition, so you might be getting TAP funding or you might be getting some sort of market visit support, all with the purpose of you being able to shake hands on a deal.